Hello everyone, welcome to the 21st iOS tutorial. In this tutorial, we will see how user can interact with the UI, and this is called gestures. For example, and we want to recognize when the user tap or swipe, pan, or other gestures. So, we will define it with two ways, which is adding the gestures via storyboard or adding it programmatically. So let's move on. Okay, here's the final product which we are going to create in this tutorial. If you remember from previous tutorial, we created these two shapes, and now I want to get some gestures to these shapes. When I swipe, I want to decrease the opacity. So right now, see, as soon as I swipe, it's going to get out of the view. So the last one, it just gets rid of the triangle. And also I want to have a pan gesture for this rectangle. When I select it and drag it to the view, it just should come with my finger. So let's create it. Okay, here is the Xcode, actually Xcode 6. It is updated and finally we can use it. I couldn't use it before because it was under NDA and it was a beta version, so I just preferred when they released the actual production, I show it to you. So this is not very different, but there are so many tools and it's really powerful. I will talk about it later, but for now we just need whatever we learned so far. So I will go ahead and talk about things that we want for gestures. If you remember from the beginning of this tutorial, I said there are two ways to add gestures. First, via storyboard. So for the swipe gestures, for reducing the opacity of the triangle, I will use the storyboard. And for dragging this rectangle, I will use programmatically actually approach. So in order to add our gestures, we have to at first select our view. This is the rectangle view. We cannot see it because it's programmatically draw, but we can just select it, and then from this object library we can select the gesture that we want. We want the swipe gesture, so we look for swipe, or we can easily type it here, then you can find it for. But all of the gestures are at the end of the palette. So see, you can see tap gestures, pinch gesture, rotation gesture, swipe, and pan, and all of the things. Screen edge. This is the new gesture they put. So for this, we need swipe gesture. So we drag it and drop it to the view that we want. So this is the triangle view. We drop it here, and as soon as we drag it and drop it, you can see this shape comes here. And if I just name this gesture, swipe gesture. And then from we see the class, the controller for this class, and then say, okay, open, we want the two views next to each other. So let's open its controller. Let me get more space here. Okay, so here's the controller for this view. Yes, there's a controller. And now we drag and drop from this gesture to the view. So let's just drag, control drag to this view. And I don't know. And you just select UI swipe instead of ID, the swipe gesture recognizer, and I call it triangle swipe, and enter. And as soon as I do this, it creates something like a button, action button. So it creates this gesture. Now what I need, I have to put inside of this method. For example, if I do something when we recognize this gesture, I have to put inside of this view. What do I need for this? I want to reduce the opacity. How do I reduce the opacity? First of all, I have to create the outlet for this view. In order to reduce the opacity, I have to get the view and reduce the opacity every time we swipe. So in order to create an outlet for this view, I have to control drag to the interface to the end. So here the outlet. We created the outlet thousands of times, so we call it triangle view. Triangle view, and it creates our outlet. And it gives us error triangle shape because the triangle shape is not important yet. So we import this class, import triangle shape.h. If you wonder where this triangle shape class comes from, here is the classes that we created last tutorial, triangle shape.h and .m. Here is where we draw the triangle. So this is, I just imported this class inside of the view controller. And now we have this class. We need to just change the opacity. We have to put it inside of this method that we created. This is the IB action with control drag. So I would say first call the outlet that we create, self dot triangle view, and then we have a property called alpha, and this alpha we can change the opacity, and we would say alpha equals to self dot triangle view dot alpha minus 0.2. And what is alpha first? Let me just explain it more. Alpha starts from 0, which is completely hidden, to 1, which is completely shown. So if you want to say, okay, half shown, half hidden, we should say 0.5. But since we want every time we reduce 20% of the opacity, we just say minus 20, minus 0.2. So the alpha is between 0 and 1. So each time it will decrease 0.2 from alpha. So let's build our application and run it to see if it's working. Okay, let's test it. We swipe from the left to right. This is a default. We can change this left to right to left, or up to top to bottom, or bottom to top, or whatever we want. So right now it's working. So we can work on this gesture, which is dragging and moving it through the view. So let's do it. Okay, if we want to add our gesture programmatically, it's a little bit more work to do, but it's again simple. So first of all, we have to create an outlet of this view for our controller. So it's exactly like creating an outlet for this. We need to create an outlet for this view as well. So let's see both views together. This is manual, we put it to automatic, and let's get rid of some of the methods that we don't want it. Okay, this one, let's have more space here. And now we can create an outlet for this view as well. So control drag, and we call it rounded rect, or RRV, because this is rounded rect class, RRV, call it this, or small RRV, rounded rect view. Okay, and it gives us error because we didn't import its class. And the class is rounded rect, so import rounded rect.h. And if you don't remember, we created this 2.h and .m file, and we have it. So in order to add the gesture, we have to add it programmatically. Inside of view.did_load, since we don't need any more this storyboard, so I will just switch to one view and go into the controller, our view controller, and go into the view.did_load, and I want to add the gesture. How do I add the gestures? It's so simple. At first we call this outlet, okay, self.rrv, and then say we're using the method called add gestures. Add gesture recognizer. And now we add the gesture that we want. For here we need UI pan gesture. So we say UI pan gesture recognizer. We should have to allocate it, alloc, and then init, I have to add one more bracket here to recognize the view. And instead of init itself, we can use init with target, and we can say, okay, we initialize it with target. Our target is our view, so we want a rectangle view to take action with the gesture. So we say self.rrv, so this is our target, and what we want to do, and we have to take action for this, and we used selector. I didn't talk about the selectors, but it's really simple. It just says use this method once we have any action. And how do we use it? We put at sign and then selector, and then inside of this we put the name of our method. We will create the method called pan, but for now I just created like this. We don't have pan gesture, that's why we may have some warnings, but this is exactly like this. We will create a pan method inside of this view class, and that's why we say, okay, this is selector. It will select that method once it recognizes the UI pan gesture recognizer. So this is how we add the gesture. First, add the gesture recognizer, what kind of gestures, which is UI pan gesture recognizer, and we allocate it, and we initialize it. We target. What is our target? Target is the view that we want to have the gesture, and the selector is a method that we want to call whenever this gesture is recognized. So the difference between adding it with storyboard and adding it with programmatically is that you don't implement the gesture inside of the controller. You implement the gesture inside of its view. For example, because we want to have a pan gesture recognizer, we have to add our implementation inside of the rounded rect view, not inside of the controller. But in our swiped, we just added our implementation inside of the controller. But because I added programmatically for this, I have to implement it inside of its view, which is rounded rect. So I go to the rounded rect and create the pan. Remember, we added a pan method here. So I have to create a method called pan and add it to this rounded rect class. So let's create this method. We say, if you remember, these are the things that we created in previous tutorial, but for now we created the pan method. It returns nothing, that's why we put void. And now we say pan. And what we want to pass is a UI pan gesture recognizer. UI pan gesture recognizer. This is the argument of this method. Call it gesture. Okay, now we have this method. Every time we recognize a pan gesture recognizer inside of our controller will select this method, this pan method. So we go back to random direct, and now we can add our implementation inside of this method. How we can drag our view? We use a translation. It should be a little bit, I call it not simple, but it is not that hard. It is just 3 lines of code, but you need to understand it. First of all, we have to calculate the point that a user has his finger, and then we move the view, we move the center of the view with the finger. So we have to at first get the current position of the finger. So we use CG point, you know, CG float, CG point. I had a previous tutorial we talk about it, and I call it for here translation. And we use this gesture. This gesture has a method called translation in view. So called gesture translation in view, and we say gesture dot view. It gets the point of where the finger is moving, and now we say, okay, we want our gesture, we want to change the center of our view. Where do we want? Okay, we want to have CG point make, and we need CG float for X and CG float for Y. What do we need for X? We need gesture dot view dot center dot X plus, this is where we add the X, which is the horizontal distance, and in translation, the translation that we just made, translation dot X, and for Y we do the same thing, say gesture dot view dot center, this time dot Y plus translation dot Y. This means all the time, every time actually, we add this translation where the finger goes to our view. We add X or Y, whatever it is, to the view, and we have to put it back to 0 because it will accumulate this X and Y. So we need to make it 0 every time in order to avoid accumulation. So we say gesture set translation, and we have a handy method for the CG point. We can say 0, 0, 0 to put it 0, but there is a good method here, CG point 0, and it is 0. It's basically a open parenthesis 0, 0, 0, close parenthesis, and in view, which is gesture.view. And now we have our gesture here. We can run our program and see if it's working. And it's created, build it. It says we don't have a pan method, but we have it here. And ran the direct. Let's see what would happen, but yeah, it's working. Gestures have an important property called state, and it's the status of the gestures. For example, for the pan, we have state began. So it means that the device just recognizes this gesture is happening. And then we have state changed. It means that I'm moving from this point to this point. It means change. And then we have state ended. So it means that I release the button or anything. I'm not touching the view, so it's ended. We have state cancelled or failed. It's for the time that, for example, you receive a phone call and will cancel and this stuff. But this state is very important because, for example, for some gestures you want to do something while user is changing, when the gesture is changed. For gestures like tap, we don't have began or change. We have just recognize because it's not continuous, but it's just recognize. We say, okay, recognize. And how do we differentiate between these states? We say, for example, for this pan, I would say if gesture dot state equal UI gesture recognizer state, and now we have different states, which is began, cancel, change, ended, fail, possible, and recognize. Because this is tap gesture, pan gestures, we have began. So we can do whatever we want inside of the began and put it inside of this curly brace if statement. And if it's, for example, else if gesture dot state equals UI gesture recognizer state, and once it's ended, we can put our code inside of this. Oh, we have to put 2 equals. Yeah, this is how we differentiate between the states of the gestures. That's it for this tutorial. You can add your comments, and if you have any questions, you can add it underneath our tutorial description. You can go to hookstack.blogspot.com and you can download the application over there, or you can just copy paste the code and add it by yourself. That's all for this tutorial, and have a good day.